The frame crashed before I even understood what had happened. The glass splintered across the tiled floor, 1,000 tiny reflections of a life breaking apart. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, arms crossed. That cold smirk on her lips. "It's junk, Helen," she said, her voice echoing in the hallway. "This old thing's been collecting dust for years. Who keeps a painting like that in their living room? It makes the house look ancient." I stood there staring at the torn canvas lying face down on the floor, the wooden frame cracked along the edges. The painting, my late husband's last work, had hung there for 40 years. It wasn't just a decoration, it was my memory of him. I bent down my fingers, brushing the edge of the canvas. A small streak of blue paint stained my skin. I could almost hear his voice again. "Never rush the sea. Helen, let it breathe." Behind me, I heard laughter. My son Daniel tried to calm her. "Laura, please," he whispered, but he didn't move to help me. He never did anymore. I turned slowly, my heart steady but heavy. "You threw away the last piece of your father's soul," I said quietly. Laura rolled her eyes. "Your sentimental nonsense won't pay bills, Helen. Maybe it's time you accepted reality. You live here rent-free, you don't cook, and you fill the house with dust and nostalgia. You're lucky we don't charge you." For a moment I wanted to scream, but what came out instead was silence. Dense, suffocating silence that filled the entire room. I picked up the broken frame, tracing the signature in the corner, faint but still visible beneath the grime, E. Gray. My husband Edward Gray, the man who died with paint still on his hands and dreams the world never saw. I looked at Laura and asked one question. "If everything that mattered to you were in this frame, what would you do?" She scoffed. "I'd throw it out too. You can't live off ghosts." I nodded slowly. "Then I hope one day you understand what ghosts can teach." That night, after they went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with the shards of glass scattered around my feet. I didn't cry. I'd run out of tears long ago. Instead, I spoke softly as if Edward could still hear me. "They laughed, love. They said your art was worthless." My voice trembled, but not from weakness. "They have no idea what you left behind." I gathered the painting's pieces into an old box and carried it upstairs to the small attic where they'd told me to keep my clutter. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound of a life reduced to quiet corners. In that cramped attic, I laid the broken canvas on a table. I ran my fingers over the strokes, remembering the night he painted it our last winter together. He'd been coughing, his hands unsteady, but his eyes still bright. When I'm gone, he'd said, "Keep this one close. It's the sea we never got to see together." The sea. I could still smell the faint oil of the paint, that bittersweet scent of creation and decay. They called it worthless, but it held the only truth I had left. When dawn broke, I heard Laura downstairs laughing into her phone. "I swear Daniel's mom hoards garbage. If she died tomorrow, the house would look better." I froze at the top of the stairs, her words slicing through the fragile quiet. "We'll sell the place next year anyway," she continued. "There's no point keeping all her old stuff. Maybe we can get something for that ugly painting. Some vintage dealer might take pity on us." My grip tightened on the railing. Every syllable felt like betrayal dressed in casual cruelty. I went back into the attic, shut the door, and whispered, "They're selling memories, Edward. Our memories." The light cut through the small window, illuminating the cracked canvas. And then I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a faint glimmer of gold beneath the chipped corner. I tilted the painting closer to the light. Under the layer of dust beneath the outer paint, there was another signature, his real one, the one he used only for his masterworks. My breath caught. Could it be? For a moment I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, an old woman's wishful thinking, but the deeper I looked, the more I knew it was real. That discovery felt like a pulse under my skin, the heartbeat of a secret Edward had hidden even from me. I pressed my palm against the canvas. "You left me something, didn't you?" I whispered. Downstairs, I heard Daniel's voice rise in frustration. "Laura, please don't talk about selling the house." "Why not?" she snapped. "She's lived enough. We need our own life." Their voices blurred together into one steady drone of betrayal. I didn't need to listen. I'd heard it all before. Later that evening, when they left for a dinner party, I went downstairs. The living room was spotless too. Spotless as if they'd erased every trace of me. I sat on the sofa, clutching the broken frame. The silence felt heavier now, pressing against my chest. I thought of the years I'd given to this house, the birthdays I'd hosted, the nights I'd stayed awake nursing Daniel through fevers. All of it now reduced to inconvenience. I looked around and said to the empty room, "You built your life here because I gave you mine." The clock ticked louder than usual, each second like a reminder that time doesn't forgive. I turned toward the painting propped against the wall and whispered, "If you still have something to say, Edward, now would be the time." The faint reflection of the streetlight hit the cracked varnish, revealing a swirl of ocean blue that seemed almost alive. I leaned closer, and for a moment I thought I heard the sound of waves. Maybe I was losing my mind, or maybe I was finally listening. Before going to bed, I wrapped the painting in an old linen sheet and slid it under my bed. Something inside me had shifted. They thought they'd humiliated me, but what they'd done was wake something far stronger, a determination that had slept too long. As I turned off the light, I looked out the window toward the empty driveway, where their new car gleamed under the moonlight. They had everything they thought mattered: money, comfort, superiority, but they didn't have truth. When I finally lay down, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow I'll find out who's laughing last." Then turning toward the darkness, I added quietly, "If you've ever been treated like you're invisible, if someone's ever made you feel small for holding on to what you love, comment one word below respect. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's a warning." I closed my eyes, holding the faint scent of oil paint in the air, and let the night settle around me like armor. They thought they'd buried my past. They had no idea I was about to resurrect it. The morning after, the house smelled of burnt coffee and silence. I moved carefully, as if one wrong step could shatter what little peace was left. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice me. The glow from the screen lit up the deep lines under his eyes, traces of exhaustion I once pitied, but now I wasn't sure if it was guilt or indifference. Laura stood by the counter, sipping her green smoothie like she was tasting victory. "Morning," she said, not looking up. "You might want to clean the living room. The realtor's coming by later." I paused mid-step. "Realtor?" She smiled faintly. "Yes, Daniel and I decided it's time. The market's high. We can sell the house, downsize, and maybe get something more modern, somewhere without all the clutter." Her tone was smooth, polite, almost kind, but it was the kind of kindness that cuts deeper than cruelty. "This house," I said, voice low, "was your father's dream. Every nail, every brush of paint on those walls came from his hands." Laura set her cup down with a deliberate clink. "Helen, you've told that story 1,000 times. I get it. You and Edward built a life here, but that was decades ago. Things change. We have to move forward." I looked at Daniel, hoping he'd say something, anything. He avoided my eyes. His silence was worse than betrayal. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Then I said softly, "And where would you like me to go?" Laura didn't hesitate. "You can move in with my cousin in Clearwater. She runs that senior community, remember? It's beautiful there, peaceful." She spoke as if she were doing me a favor. "A senior community," I repeated, forcing a smile that hurt my cheeks. "You mean a place where old things go to fade quietly?" She turned, her patience evaporating. "You're being dramatic. You can't expect us to put our lives on hold forever. You don't even contribute financially. You should be grateful we've let you stay this long." There it was, the word that burned deeper than fire. Grateful. The word people use when they've already stripped you of dignity and want to make sure you thank them for it. I walked to the sink, washing the single teacup I'd used, because if I didn't keep my hands busy, I'd scream. The water hissed over my trembling fingers. I remembered when Daniel was 10, standing right there showing me the crooked clay cup he'd made at school. He'd said, "It's ugly, Mom, but it's for you." I'd told him, "It's beautiful because your hands made it." Now he sat just a few feet away, silent while someone else dismantled everything we had built together. As Laura left the kitchen to take a phone call, I turned to my son. "Daniel," I whispered. He looked up, startled by the sound of his own name. "You're really selling the house?" He rubbed his forehead as if he could erase the conversation with his fingers. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is. You know we're struggling. The mortgage, the kids' tuition, the bills, it's too much." I stared at him, realizing how different his face looked now. He had Edward's eyes, but none of his spirit. "You think selling memories will make you rich?" I asked quietly. "You'll only end up poor in ways you can't measure." He sighed, avoiding my gaze again. "It's not about memories, Mom. It's about survival." Later that afternoon, the realtor arrived, a young man in a sharp navy suit and too much cologne. He smiled at me with the polite detachment of someone appraising furniture. "Lovely property," he said, scanning the walls. "It's got character. Buyers love that." He stopped by the blank space where the painting had once hung. Was something here before Laura jumped in before I could answer? Just an old painting. We finally got rid of it. The place looks brighter now. I wanted to tell him the truth, that the old painting had more soul than all the sterile white houses he'd ever sell, but I stayed quiet. Some truths are too sacred to waste on strangers. The realtor nodded, making notes. "We'll list it at a good price. You'll get plenty of offers." When he left, Laura clapped her hands together. Finally, some progress. "I'll call the cleaning crew tomorrow." She turned to me. "Oh, and we'll need you to pack your things soon. You'll be more comfortable once everything's settled." Her voice carried that familiar sweetness, the kind that hides poison beneath honey. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went up to the attic and opened the box again. The painting's surface caught the dim moonlight. I ran my fingertips along the hidden signature, tracing each letter like a prayer. Beneath the dust, I felt something pulsing. Hope faint but alive. I whispered, "If this is real, if your name still means something, let it speak." The next morning, I decided to test my instincts. I wrapped the painting carefully in a blanket and carried it to a small art supply store 2 streets over. The shop smelled of turpentine and old wood, the kind of place that still believed in creation. Behind the counter sat a man in his 50s with paint-stained hands and kind eyes. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. I unwrapped the painting, revealing the cracked surface. "I just need someone to tell me if this is worth restoring," I said, my voice trembling despite myself. He leaned closer, his brow furrowing. "This looks familiar. Where did you get it?" "My husband painted it," I said softly. "Edward Gray." His eyes widened slightly. "You mean the Edward Gray, the one from the 1980s New England school?" I froze. "You've heard of him." He nodded slowly, only whispers. He was known for his Ocean series paintings that disappeared after his death. Some collectors have been searching for them for years. You're saying this is one of his... For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, his last one." The man's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "If this is authentic Mrs. Gray, it could be extraordinary. I'd suggest having it professionally verified. I know someone at the New York Art Registry who handles rare finds." I thanked him, clutching the painting to my chest like it might vanish if I let go. When I stepped outside, the world looked sharper, more alive. The sunlight fell on the cracked paint, revealing tiny veins of gold leaf buried beneath the surface. Edward had always said, "Hide your strength where they least expect it." Now I understood what he meant. As I walked home, I rehearsed what I might say to Daniel and Laura. Maybe I'd tell them the truth. Maybe I'd keep it secret just for now. But when I turned the corner, I saw their car in the driveway, and through the open garage door, I saw boxes stacked high labeled "Donation." My heart sank when I recognized the handwriting. My name scrawled on cardboard next to the words, "Mom's Things." I stood there frozen. They were already packing me out of my own life. I stepped inside quietly. Laura was taping up another box. She looked up startled. "Oh, Helen, you're back early. I thought I told you to rest." I ignored her tone. "Where are you sending those boxes?" She shrugged. "Just old junk. The Salvation Army will pick them up tomorrow." I stared at the pile, noticing the corner of Edward's old sketchbook poking out from one. My hands trembled, but my voice stayed calm. "Leave them. I'll decide what goes." She gave me a tight smile. "We're just trying to help." Help. Such an innocent word for such cruel intent. I looked her in the eyes and said quietly, "You've taken everything from me already. Just make sure you don't take something you'll regret." She frowned. "Is that a threat I didn't answer?" I simply walked past her up the stairs, clutching the painting tighter. That night, under the dim attic light, I stared at the canvas and whispered, "If they want war, let it begin with truth." 3 days passed and I hardly left my room. The sound of packing tape and laughter floated through the house like ghosts mocking me. Each thud of a box hitting the floor was another piece of my past sealed away. I spent the mornings quietly polishing Edward's brushes and pretending not to notice when Laura came upstairs to check on my progress. What she really meant was to make sure I wasn't slowing down her schedule. On the 4th morning, I walked outside for the first time in weeks. The air was sharp, heavy with the scent of rain and old magnolias. Across the street, my neighbor Walter was trimming his hedges. He had lived there since before Daniel was born a widower, with a gentle smile and a quiet loyalty. When he saw me, his eyes softened with concern. "Helen," he called, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I was beginning to think they'd locked you up in there." I smiled faintly. "Almost," I said. He chuckled, but the sound faded quickly when he saw the bruised look in my eyes. "Something's wrong." "They're selling the house," I said simply. "They're boxing everything, throwing away the rest." Walter frowned. "They can't sell without your consent. The deed's in your name, isn't it?" It was I murmured until last year. I signed it over to Daniel for tax purposes. He shook his head slowly. "Helen, you trusted too much." I sighed. "It's a family curse." He hesitated, then said something that made my heart lurch. "You know, a few months ago, a man came by asking about your husband's paintings. Said he was researching Edward Gray for an exhibition in Boston. I told him you still lived here, but he looked surprised, like he thought you were gone." I froze. "An exhibition for Edward." Walter nodded. Said the museum's been trying to trace missing works from the Ocean Souls collection. Apparently, those paintings have become rare and valuable. The words rare and valuable echoed in my mind like thunder. "Did he leave a name?" I asked. "Yeah." Walter squinted, trying to recall. "Grant something. Grant Henderson, maybe." He left a card, but I tossed it. Thought it was one of those art scammers. A warmth spread through my chest, part anger, part hope. "Thank you, Walter. You've helped more than you know." That evening, I took the painting from its hiding place and examined the signature again under a flashlight. Beneath the fake initials, E.G. faint strokes of gold glimmered through the cracked paint. Edward's real signature, E. Graymore. My hands trembled. Graymore was the name he'd used before changing it to Gray when he'd left the art world behind. Few people knew. Only I did. The next morning, I took the first bus downtown. The ride felt endless, the city sliding past the foggy window like a memory I didn't belong to anymore. I found the small library near the art district, the same one Edward used to visit when we were newly married. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s, recognized his name immediately. Edward Graymore. Yes, there's been renewed interest lately. A private collector paid millions for one of his early sketches last year. Millions. I nearly dropped my bag. "Do you know who's handling the exhibition?" She typed something into her computer and handed me a printout. "The curator is Grant Henderson. He's at the Boston Museum of Modern Art." I stared at the paper. The museum's contact number gleamed at the bottom like a secret invitation. That night, while Daniel and Laura were asleep, I sat in the attic with the painting propped against the wall. My heart raced as I dialed the number. The line rang 3 times before a voice answered, smooth and professional. "Boston Museum of Modern Art. This is Grant Henderson." I took a breath. "Mr. Henderson, my name is Helen Gray. My late husband was Edward Graymore." There was silence. Then his tone changed completely. "Did you say Graymore as in the original painter of the Ocean Souls series?" "Yes," I whispered. "I have one of his last works." He exhaled sharply. "Ma'am, do you understand what you're saying? The final Ocean Souls piece has been missing for over 30 years. "I understand," I said. "But I think it's been missing because no one wanted to look in the right place." He asked me to send photos. My hands shook as I peeled back the protective sheet and snapped several pictures under warm light. When I hit send, my heart thudded so hard I could hear it echo in the quiet attic. A few minutes later, his reply came through. "This appears authentic. Please, whatever you do, don't let anyone touch it. We need to verify it immediately." I didn't sleep that night. I sat watching the glow of my phone screen, half terrified, half alive again for the first time in years. But morning came with new cruelty. Laura burst into my room, waving a folder. "You went out yesterday." I blinked. "Yes, why?" She tossed the folder onto my bed. "Because I found this in your purse." A library receipt. "Really, Helen? What are you planning selling more antiques? You can't just go wandering around. You nearly gave Daniel a heart attack when you didn't answer your phone." I held her gaze. I didn't realize I needed permission to breathe. Her jaw tightened. "We're worried about you. You've been acting strange hiding things." "Hiding things," I repeated slowly. "Like the way you're hiding the real reason you're selling this house." Her face hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I said quietly. "I know you're drowning in debt, Laura. I know you want to use the sale to bail yourselves out, but I also know something else. You're selling more than walls. You're selling history." For a flicker of a second, I saw uncertainty in her eyes, but then she recovered. "You're losing it, Helen. Maybe it's time we had you evaluated. You've been forgetful, paranoid." The words hit me like ice water. I realized her plan wasn't just to remove me from the house. It was to make me legally powerless. Once they declared me incompetent, they could take everything down to Edward's brushes. She left, slamming the door behind her, her perfume lingering like smoke. I sat there, shaking the truth finally forming its sharp shape. This wasn't just greed. It was an erasure. That evening, Walter knocked on the back door, holding a small envelope. "Found this," he said. "Remember that man I told you about? He came back today, left his card again." I opened it. "Grant Henderson, Senior Curator, Boston Museum of Modern Art." My pulse quickened. "Thank you, Walter." He glanced toward the house. "You be careful, Helen. They don't look like they mean well." "I know," I said, "but maybe it's time I stopped meaning well, too." When the house fell silent that night, I packed a small bag. I wrapped the painting carefully and placed it inside. I looked around my room, the faded curtains, the bedside photo of Edward smiling, the faint smell of lavender in the air. Then I whispered, "I'm done being their ghost." I left a note on the kitchen table. "Gone to visit an old friend. Don't wait up." Outside, the air was cold biting. I walked down the empty street, the painting cradled in my arms like a secret child. The moonlight spilled across the canvas through the cloth, glinting faintly where the signature hid beneath the layers of time. As I waited for the bus at the corner, I looked back once at the dark windows of the house that used to be mine. I could almost hear Laura's voice calling me useless, Daniel's silence echoing beside it. Then I turned away. The night smelled of rain and possibility. Somewhere in Boston, a man was waiting to see the truth Edward left behind. And somewhere behind me, a family built on greed was about to learn that you can't sell what was never yours. By the time the train reached Boston, the first light of dawn had started breaking over the city. I sat by the window, clutching my bag, the painting wrapped tightly inside. The reflection in the glass showed an old woman with tired eyes and wind-tangled hair, but behind that exhaustion lived something new, resolve. When the doors opened, the morning air hit me with the scent of sea salt and iron. Edward would have loved this. He used to say every harbor smelled like second chances. I made my way to the museum's side entrance where the staff offices were. Grant Henderson met me in the lobby. He was tall, gray at the temples, his suit slightly wrinkled in a way that made him look like he'd been awake for days. "Mrs. Gray?" He asked, his voice low but urgent. When I nodded, he extended a hand. "You have no idea how long we've been searching for this piece." He led me through a maze of corridors until we reached a private examination room. The white walls and bright overhead lights made me feel both exposed and invisible. I placed the wrapped canvas on the table. Grant's assistant, a young woman in latex gloves, carefully peeled back the fabric. When the painting emerged into the light, even I had to catch my breath. The colors seemed to pulse under the surface, deep blues veins of gold, the suggestion of something alive just beneath the paint. Grant leaned closer, whispering, "This is extraordinary. Look at the layering, the technique. It's unmistakable, Mrs. Gray. Do you realize what this is?" "It's my husband's goodbye," I said softly. He looked up, visibly moved. "It's Ocean Souls No. 7, the final piece of the Graymore series. For decades, experts assumed it had been destroyed." I stared at him. "And what does that mean?" He smiled faintly. It means this painting isn't just art, it's history. If authenticated, it could be worth tens of millions. Tens of millions. The words felt unreal, like hearing someone else's dream. I sank into the nearest chair, gripping the armrest. Edward's art, the same art our family mocked, had become something priceless. For a moment, pride and grief wrestled inside me until they were one and the same. Grant's tone softened. I'd like to send this to our conservation lab today for testing, just to confirm materials and signature. But Mrs. Gray, you'll need to sign ownership documentation. Has anyone else claimed this painting? The question stabbed through the air like a blade. No, I said quickly, then hesitated. At least, not yet. He noticed my pause but didn't press. We'll keep your name confidential until the results are official. I'll call you as soon as we have confirmation. I thanked him and left the city spinning around me. As I stepped outside, the streets of Boston buzzed with life-honking taxis, coffee carts, people hurrying past. No one knew that a woman their age had just placed a forgotten masterpiece on a table. I smiled to myself. Let them underestimate me. Everyone always did. At a small cafe across from the museum, I ordered black coffee and sat by the window watching the morning unfold. My phone vibrated on the table, 12 missed calls from Daniel, 5 from Laura. My throat tightened. They must have found my note. I let the phone ring again, refusing to answer. For once, their panic didn't belong to me. Later that afternoon, a news alert flashed on the cafe television. Local family reports missing elderly woman believed to suffer memory decline. My picture filled the screen, an old photo of me at Edward's funeral. The reporter's voice said family members describe her as confused, possibly unstable. My stomach dropped. They were erasing me in real time. I could almost hear Laura's polished tone feeding the reporter lines. We're just worried for her safety. She's been imagining things lately, talking about lost treasures and secret paintings. I laughed bitterly under my breath. They didn't even hesitate to weaponize my age. Every gray hair became evidence of madness. When Grant called that evening, his voice trembled with excitement. Mrs. Gray, we finished the first verification. The pigments and canvas date perfectly to the 1980s. The underpainting reveals the original Graymore mark in 24-karat gold leaf. There's no doubt it's authentic. For a long time, I couldn't speak. Then I whispered, he told me once the sea keeps secrets better than people. Grant paused. Mrs. Gray, the museum would like to make an offer. We can assist you in securing insurance and arrange an exclusive exhibition. You'd be listed as the sole custodian of the Graymore legacy. The word sole custodian wrapped around my heart like armor. For the first time in years, I wasn't someone's burden. I was someone's beginning. But the victory was short-lived. The moment I left the museum, my phone exploded with messages. Daniel's voice on the voicemail was shaky. Mom, where are you? Please call me back. Laura's worried sick. I almost smiled at the irony. Then Laura's message followed colder rehearsed. Helen, this is ridiculous. You're scaring Daniel. Come home immediately or we'll have to involve the authorities. You're not well. I deleted every message. Let them panic. Let them taste uncertainty for once. That night I rented a room at a small inn near the harbor. The room was modest, smelling faintly of salt and soap, but to me it felt like freedom. I sat by the window watching the waves shimmer under the moonlight. Edward had always said art wasn't about beauty, it was about truth. Now that truth was finally surfacing, and those who buried it would soon face the tide. Still, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, the innkeeper knocked on my door holding a folded newspaper. Ma'am, she said gently, you might want to see this. They're saying you're missing. On the front page was my picture again, larger this time, with the headline, Elderly Widow Disappears After Confrontation with Family. Beneath it, a quote from Laura. She's been unstable for months. We just want her safe. My hands trembled as I read, not from fear, but from fury. I could feel the shift inside me the moment pain hardened into purpose. They wanted me silenced because they knew I had something worth more than all their possessions combined. The next morning, Grant arranged for a temporary legal advisor to help me with paperwork. Her name was Melissa Kane, a woman with sharp eyes and a steadiness that immediately comforted me. As we signed the initial verification forms, she said, I read the article about you, Mrs. Gray. You should know it's a common tactic in inheritance disputes. discredit the elder before they can defend themselves. I nodded. They think if they call me crazy enough times, the world will believe it. She smiled faintly. Then we'll just have to make the world listen to the truth first. By evening, the museum's legal department confirmed that the painting's ownership was officially under my name. I held the signed certificate in my hands, feeling its weight like justice taking form. When I returned to my inn, the phone was ringing again. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. Daniel's voice was different this time, broken, desperate. "Mom, please. Laura's gone too far. She called the police. They think you're in danger. If you don't come home, they'll file for guardianship. Please, Mom, just talk to me." I said nothing for a long moment, then I answered softly. "Daniel, do you remember when you were little and you broke your father's compass? You cried for hours because you thought he'd be angry, but he just said, 'It's only lost if you stop looking.' Do you remember that?" He hesitated. "I guess." "Well," I said, my voice calm and steady, "tell your wife the same thing. What she's lost, she'll never find again." And I hung up. The silence afterward felt like the beginning of something powerful. I looked at the certificate again, the ink still fresh. Beneath it, Edward's signature glimmered faintly in the lamplight like the sea finally giving up what it had guarded all these years. Tomorrow I thought they'll understand what ghosts can do when you push them too far. The storm broke the next day, and not just in the sky. Boston woke under sheets of cold rain wind clawing at the harbor. I stood by the window of the small inn holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, watching the sea thrash against the pier. My phone buzzed nonstop on the table, but I didn't move. I already knew what it would say. When I finally glanced down, the screen glowed with headlines. "Elderly widow declared mentally unfit family pleads for her safe return." Beneath it, a photo of Daniel and Laura standing outside the house that used to be mine, their arms linked like a picture-perfect couple. Laura's eyes glistened in that way she'd mastered half sorrow, half triumph. The caption read, "We're praying for Helen's safety. She's been confused, paranoid. We just want to bring her home." I set the phone down slowly. Their performance was flawless. I almost admired it, almost. By afternoon, the museum called. Grant's voice was cautious. "Mrs. Gray, I need to inform you of something. Reporters have reached out asking if we're connected to a missing person case. We're protecting your anonymity, but I thought you should know." I closed my eyes. "So they've already started poisoning the water." He sighed. "It happens more often than you'd think when money is involved. But don't worry. We'll keep everything sealed until your legal advisor clears the next step." After the call, I packed my things. Every instinct told me to stay hidden, but another part of me, a sharper, older part, refused. They'd turned my name into a lie, and lies I'd learned rot faster in the dark. That evening, I boarded the late train back to Savannah. The ride felt endless. Rain lashed against the windows like the world itself was warning me to turn back, but I had to see it. I had to see how far they'd gone. When I arrived, the house stood like a stranger. Bright lights spilling through the windows, voices echoing from inside. I moved quietly through the side gate, slipping under the porch light. Through the open curtains, I saw boxes stacked along the hallway labeled Estate Sale Gray Collection. I froze. On the dining table, spread like trophies, were Edward's sketches, every one of them. The charcoal self-portrait, the study of waves, the small watercolor he'd painted the day Daniel was born. My breath caught as Laura held one up under the chandelier, laughing. "Can you believe this junk might actually sell?" The appraiser said someone might give us a few hundred for the set. "Are you sure we should be doing this?" Daniel asked, his voice uneasy. "Mom's name is still attached to these." Laura poured herself a glass of wine, her smirk widening. "Relax. She's gone, Daniel. And even if she crawls back, no one's going to believe a word she says now. You saw the paper. The world thinks she's lost it. We'll sell these, settle the debts, and start fresh." Daniel didn't respond. He just stared at the drawings, his face pale hollow. I pressed my back against the wall outside, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear. For a moment I thought I might collapse. Not from shock, but from the simple, brutal truth they weren't just taking things. They were taking meaning. Everything Edward had ever touched, every breath he'd left behind, was being sold like scrap metal. Then I saw something that made my stomach twist. On the mantel, where Edward's last photograph used to sit, was a new frame, a picture of Laura at some charity gala surrounded by the town's wealthiest women. My family had been replaced by her ambition. I wanted to burst through the door to scream to tear every box apart, but I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took pictures, each label, each artwork, each price tag. Evidence. Proof of what greed looks like when it smiles. When I turned to leave, I caught a flicker of movement behind me. Walter stood at his porch, a raincoat pulled tight around his shoulders. He looked shocked when he saw me. "Helen, my God, they said you were missing." I raised a finger to my lips. "Not missing, Walter, just invisible." He glanced toward the house, his expression hardening. "They've been coming and going all week. Movers, appraisers. It's like a market in there." I knew something wasn't right. "Can you do something for me?" I asked quietly. "If anyone asks, you haven't seen me. But keep your porch camera on. Record everything." He nodded without hesitation. "You've got it." That night, I stayed in the guest room of a friend's small cottage on the edge of town, a place where no one would think to look. The wind rattled the windows, and I could hear the distant hum of traffic from the highway. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every sound of rain outside mixing with the voices in my head. Edward's calm patience, Daniel's boyish laughter, Laura's sharp contempt. Somewhere between them, my resolve hardened into steel. By morning, my phone buzzed with another message from Grant. The museum board approved the valuation. The piece has been appraised at $120 million USD pending final certification. $120 million. My hands trembled around the phone. The number meant nothing to me in itself, but I could already imagine what it would mean to them. To Laura, to Daniel. They would drown in it. But what struck me hardest wasn't the money. It was what Grant said next. The piece will be displayed under the name The Widow's Sea Anonymous Custodian. Anonymous. That word felt right. I didn't need their world to know my name. I just needed them to see the truth when it came crashing down. That afternoon, I returned to the neighborhood. Walter's text arrived as I reached the corner. "You'll want to see this." Attached was a short video from his porch camera. In the footage, Laura stood at the front door speaking to a man in a dark suit. I recognized the logo on his briefcase. Holloway and Finch Estate Attorneys. I turned up the volume. "She's incompetent," Laura was saying. "The doctor's report confirms it. Once the guardianship order goes through, the assets will revert to my husband as next of kin. We'll handle the paperwork." The attorney nodded. "Understood. Once the court grants the order, the bank accounts and property titles will transfer automatically." My knees almost gave out. Guardianship. They were trying to take not just the house, but my legal existence. That night, I called Melissa, my legal advisor. "They're filing for guardianship," I said, voice shaking. Her tone sharpened instantly. "They can't, not without evidence. You're competent, and I'll make sure the court knows it. I'll file a counterpetition by morning." I hung up, exhaling shakily. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and still. I walked to the window and looked out at the town lights glittering like distant stars. Somewhere inside me, fear had burned itself out. What remained was something far colder and far more dangerous. "They think they've won," I whispered, "but the tide's already turning." I spent the rest of the night writing every word Laura had said, every signature I remembered, every lie I'd overheard. The pages filled quickly, ink smudging under my fingers. By dawn, the first light slipped through the curtains, painting the paper in shades of gold. It looked like the beginning of something holy. As I sealed the stack of notes into an envelope marked, "For Grant Henderson Confidential," I thought of Edward again, his last words before he died. "Don't let them decide what your truth is worth." I smiled faintly. "I won't," I said into the empty room. "Not this time." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of salt from the distant sea, the same sea that lived forever inside Edward's painting. Somewhere far away, people were preparing to bid on the Widow's Sea. And somewhere closer, my family was preparing to destroy what was left of mine. Only one of us would succeed. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and gray, a kind of quiet that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. I hadn't slept. The envelope of evidence sat on the table beside me. Photos, receipts, voice recordings, and Walter's video files. Each page was a piece of my dignity stitched back together. I tied my scarf, the same faded blue one Edward gave me the year he finished Ocean Souls #7, and whispered to his memory, "Let's go finish what they started." Outside, the town was stirring. The courthouse stood at the end of Main Street, its columns streaked with rain and time. As I climbed the steps, Melissa was already waiting, her coat drawn tight against the wind. "You ready?" she asked. I smiled faintly. I was ready years ago. I just didn't know it yet. Inside the hearing room smelled of old paper and polished wood. Laura sat at the far end of the table beside Daniel, both looking immaculate, perfect grief, carefully pressed. Across from them sat the attorney from Holloway and Finch, his briefcase gleaming like a weapon. He gave me a small, patronizing nod, the kind reserved for people who were about to lose everything. Judge Pritchard entered, her gaze sharp beneath her silver hair. "We're here to address the guardianship petition filed on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore against Mrs. Helen Gray." Her voice was calm, but her eyes missed nothing. "Let's proceed." The opposing attorney began, his tone dripping with sympathy. "Your Honor, my clients are acting solely out of concern. Mrs. Gray has displayed signs of delusion, paranoia, and financial instability. She disappeared for days without contact, and she's made unsubstantiated claims about owning high-value art pieces." I almost laughed. Unsubstantiated. That was their word for truth they didn't control. He gestured toward Laura. "Mrs. Whitmore, could you explain why you filed this petition?" Laura leaned forward, her performance flawless. "Of course. We love Helen dearly, but she's been declining. She forgets things, confuses dates. She once accused me of stealing from her, which is ridiculous. We're just trying to protect her from herself." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Gray, do you have a response?" I stood slowly, hands steady on the table. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to submit my evidence." Melissa rose and handed over the folder. The judge flipped through it, her expression unreadable. I continued, my voice clear and low. "I may be old, but I am not senile. I left that house because I discovered my family was selling my husband's artwork, art they had no right to touch. I sought verification and legal counsel before they could destroy what remained of his life's work." Laura's smile faltered. "Your Honor, she's—" "Quiet, Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said without looking up. Melissa pressed a small remote, and the video from Walter's porch camera played on the court screen. Laura's voice filled the room. "She's incompetent. The doctor's report confirms it. Once the guardianship order goes through, the assets will revert to my husband." The silence afterward was deafening. Daniel's face drained of color. The attorney fumbled for words. "That must be taken out of context." "Context." I cut in, my voice sharper now. "The context is that you plan to erase me while selling what you never built." The judge looked from them to me. "Mrs. Gray, where is this artwork now?" "At the Boston Museum of Modern Art," I said, "under authentication. The director has verified it as the final painting in Edward Graymore's Ocean Souls series. Estimated value $120 million. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Laura froze, her knuckles white on the table. Daniel looked as though the ground had shifted beneath him. The judge blinked. "Do you have documentation?" Melissa handed her the museum's certification packet. The judge read in silence, then exhaled. "This is remarkable." She turned to the opposing side. "Do you still wish to pursue guardianship over a woman whose signature appears on a multi-million-dollar art ownership certificate?" Laura's mask cracked. She must have forged something. There's no way she... The judge's gavel hit once, sharp as a gunshot. Enough. Laura sat back, trembling. Daniel buried his face in his hands. The hearing adjourned within minutes. The petition was dismissed. My rights, my sanity, my name, all officially restored. But it wasn't relief I felt. It was clarity, cold and clean, like the moment before a storm breaks. Outside, the courthouse steps were slick with rain. Reporters hovered at the edges, cameras flashing as the news spread. One shouted, "Mrs. Gray, how does it feel to be vindicated?" I looked straight into the lens. Vindication isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right when no one believed you. Melissa smiled. "That's going to be on every paper tomorrow." "Let them print it," I said. "Let them remember it." As we walked toward her car, my phone rang again. The caller ID read Daniel. For a long moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. "Mom," his voice cracked, I didn't know she'd go this far. You thought silence was safer, I said. It always is until it costs you everything. I'm sorry. I know, I said softly, but apologies don't rebuild what you helped burn. He said nothing, just the sound of quiet sobbing on the other end. Before hanging up, I added, if you still want to do something right, tell the truth, not for me, for yourself. When I arrived back at the inn that evening, Grant was waiting in the lobby with an envelope. Mrs. Gray, he said, eyes shining, the museum's board wants to honor you at the unveiling. They'll list you as Helen Gray, the widow's C, publicly, not anonymously, unless you object. I hesitated. For 40 years, no one cared who I was. Maybe it's time they learned. He smiled. The world loves stories like yours. Betrayal, redemption, truth. It's powerful. I looked out at the harbor through the rain-streaked glass. It's not power, Mr. Henderson. It's survival dressed in grace. That night, I opened my old notebook, the same one where I'd once written grocery lists and prayers, and began to write again. But this time, it wasn't a list of pain. It was a map of what came next, a trust fund for underappreciated artists, a donation to the museum's restoration wing, a scholarship in Edward's name. I wrote until my hand cramped the ink, staining my fingertips like paint. At midnight, I took the museum's certificate from its envelope and laid it on the table. I thought about everything that piece of paper represented, not the money, but the vindication of a lifetime's worth of faith. I ran my fingers along the embossed seal and whispered, "We made it love." They called it worthless, and now it's history. But even then, I knew the fight wasn't over. Laura wasn't the kind of woman who surrendered quietly. Her silence now was just the pause before another storm. 2 days later, that storm came. Melissa called early in the morning, her tone clipped. "They've filed a counterclaim, Helen. They're alleging undue influence, that you were manipulated by the museum into falsifying provenance." I laughed softly. "Of course they did." She sighed. "Don't worry, it won't hold. The evidence is airtight, but they'll try to drag this out to humiliate you." I looked out the window at the sea where the sunrise was bleeding into gold. Then let them. Every lie they tell just makes the truth louder. After hanging up, I walked to the harbor and stood at the edge, the wind biting through my coat. The world felt quiet again, but this time it wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence before revelation. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the invisible mother-in-law tucked away in an attic. I felt like the storm they had built without realizing it. And as the tide crashed against the rocks below, I whispered, "You wanted to erase me, Laura. But you only wrote me into history instead." Later that day, Grant emailed me the final schedule for the exhibition opening. At the bottom, in bold letters, was the title, "The Widow's C, the lost masterpiece of Edward Graymore custodian, Mrs. Helen Gray." I stared at the name for a long time, feeling the weight of it settle in my bones. Then I smiled. The victim had vanished. In her place stood someone new, someone who had learned that justice isn't always about shouting the loudest. Sometimes it's about standing still long enough for the truth to echo on its own. And that echo was just beginning. The letter arrived 3 days before the exhibition. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten in that meticulous looping script Laura used for thank you notes and deceit. The envelope smelled faintly of her perfume, that expensive vanilla blend that always felt more like disguise than scent. "Helen," it began, "we need to talk. No press, no lawyers, just family. Daniel wants to make peace before things go any further. Please come to the house tonight at 8. Let's settle this like adults." There was no apology, no humility, just the soft arrogance of someone still convinced she could stage manage life like a charity luncheon. I stared at the letter for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. I already knew it was a trap, but something in me needed to see her face again, to look directly into the eyes of the woman who dismantled my family and thought she could get away with it. At 7:45 I arrived. The house looked the same from the outside, but I could feel it had changed. My roses were gone from the porch. The wind chime Edward had made from seashells was missing, replaced by a sterile brass lantern. I stood for a moment letting the ache rise and settle. Then I knocked. Daniel opened the door. His face was thinner drawn like a man carrying a weight he didn't understand how to set down. "Mom," he said softly. His voice carried that mixture of guilt and fear that comes when you've seen the consequences of your cowardice. "Daniel," I answered evenly. "Where's your wife?" He stepped aside. "In the living room. She wants to apologize." Apologize. The word had lost all meaning in that house. I stepped inside. The air smelled of lemon polish and tension. Laura sat by the fireplace, legs crossed, a wine glass in her hand. She looked every bit the hostess, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Helen," she said warmly, "you look radiant. Boston's been good for you." "Freedom tends to do that," I said. She laughed lightly. "I guess I deserved that." "Guessing isn't your strength, Laura. You always plan too much to guess." The smile faltered. "Please, can we not do this like enemies?" I admit I went too far. I was scared. You were unpredictable, disappearing like that, and I panicked. The guardianship, the interviews, it was a mistake. We can fix this now. I watched her carefully. Every word she said was a crafted instrument tuned for persuasion. "Fix it," I repeated slowly. "And how exactly would we fix selling my husband's life for pocket change?" She took a long sip of wine before answering. "I didn't sell anything, Helen. You overreacted. The sketches weren't worth much. And as for that painting, let's be honest, you wouldn't have even known what it was if Daniel and I hadn't pushed you out of your comfort zone." Daniel winced. "Laura, please." "No," she cut him off, voice sharpening. "Let's call it what it is. You stumbled into something valuable by accident, and now you're acting like a saint. But you're not. You're just lucky." I stepped closer, letting my words fall slow and deliberate. "Luck has nothing to do with surviving people like you." Her expression darkened. "Don't get self-righteous, Helen. You think because you've got the public's sympathy now you're untouchable? They'll move on. They always do. But we're family. We'll still be here when the headlines fade. So why don't we just be reasonable?" "Reasonable," I echoed. "Meaning what?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You sign half the painting's proceeds over to us, say it was a joint discovery. We'll withdraw the counterclaim and give you your peace back. Otherwise," she smiled again, small and poisonous, "otherwise I go to the media and tell them the truth, that you fabricated the signature, that you manipulated the museum to make yourself look noble. People love tearing down heroes, especially old ones." Daniel's voice cracked. "Laura, stop. This isn't—" She turned on him. "You think she's not playing you, Daniel? You think that old woman hasn't been planning this from the start? She's using your guilt. She's always used you. That did it." The sharp crack of my hand against the table startled even me. "Enough!" My voice filled the room, steadier than I felt. "You may lie to the world, but don't you dare lie in front of Edward's memory." For the first time, her mask slipped. The composure cracked, and something raw showed beneath the desperation of someone losing control of her script. "You think I care about your dead husband?" she spat. "All I ever wanted was for this family to stop living in the past. But no, it's always been about him. The great Edward Grey, the tragic genius. You think anyone cares now you're clinging to ghosts?" "Yes," I said quietly, "and ghosts have longer memories than people." Daniel stood suddenly, the conflict twisting his face. "Laura, please, stop. This isn't you." "Oh, it's exactly me," she snapped. "You think I'll let her humiliate us? Let her turn the world against me? I built this life while you and your mother wallowed in nostalgia." I turned toward Daniel, meeting his eyes. "She's right about one thing," I said. "She built something, just not a life of prison, and you've been living in it since the day you married her." He looked at me, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the one who brought me wildflowers from the backyard, and asked if I believed in forever. His voice broke. "Mom, I'm sorry, I was weak." "You were afraid," I said. "Fear is easier to forgive than cruelty." Laura slammed her glass down, shards scattering across the table. "I don't need forgiveness. I need fairness. That painting belongs to this family." "No," I said, stepping closer, voice calm but cutting. "It belongs to the truth. And the truth isn't a family heirloom you can split 3 ways." She stared at me, breathing hard, her face flushed with fury. "You'll regret this." "I already did," I answered. 7 years ago when I let you move in." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush air itself. Then Daniel spoke barely above a whisper. "I'll testify." Laura's head snapped toward him. "What?" He swallowed hard. "In court. For Mom. I'll tell them everything. About the sale, the lies, the interview. All of it." Her face twisted with disbelief. "You'd ruin us." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You already did." She turned toward me, voice trembling with hatred. "You turned him against me." "No," I said, "you did that yourself." I just showed him the mirror. For a long moment, no one moved. Then I picked up my coat, turned toward the door, and said quietly, "You wanted peace. Laura, this is it. The kind that comes after surrender." I walked out without looking back. Behind me, I could hear the sound of Laura's sobs, angry, shallow, the kind that come not from pain, but from the realization that power is slipping through your fingers. Daniel followed me out onto the porch. "Mom," he said softly, his breath visible in the cold night air, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I turned to him, touching his cheek like I used to when he was a child. "Forgiveness isn't a gift, Daniel. It's work. Start doing it." He nodded, tears glinting in the porch light. I pressed the folded scarf into his hands. "Edward wore this the day he painted the widow's sea. Keep it. Remember what real love looks like." When I reached the street, Walter was waiting by his fence coat pulled tight. "You all right, Helen?" I smiled faintly. "Better than I've been in years." He nodded toward the house. I had my camera running just in case. "Keep it," I said. "Proof belongs in more than one place." As I walked away, the night seemed clearer. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick with reflections, porch lights, street lamps, fragments of a life once lived here. Every step I took away from that house felt lighter. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean. Like every ounce of silence I'd swallowed over the years had finally found its way out through my voice. When I reached the corner, I turned once more to look back. Through the window, Laura was sitting on the floor, head in her hands. Daniel stood behind her, his silhouette still uncertain. I didn't hate them. Hatred would have been too small for what they'd done. What I felt was something deeper pity, because some people spend their entire lives chasing power only to find themselves crushed beneath the weight of it. As I turned away, I whispered to the wind, "You can't buy peace, Laura. You can only earn it, and you sold your chance long ago." The night swallowed the words, carrying them somewhere beyond the rooftops where the first light of dawn was beginning to glow. It was time to end this story where it truly belonged, in the light. Tomorrow the world would see the painting, and with it, the truth. The day of the exhibition came wrapped in sunlight, the kind that seems almost ceremonial, clean, bright, merciless. The Boston Museum of Modern Art loomed ahead like a cathedral of glass and marble banners, fluttering with the title in bold letters, "The Widow's Sea," the lost masterpiece of Edward Graymore. For 40 years, that name had been buried in dust and grief. Today it would rise again. Inside, the main gallery glowed with golden light. Dozens of cameras stood ready, flashes already popping like nervous applause. The air was electric, critics, curators, journalists, patrons in tailored suits whispering Edward's name as if invoking a myth. At the center of it all, veiled under a white silk cloth, waited the painting. Grant Henderson stood beside me, smiling the way a man smiles when history is about to be rewritten. "You've caused quite a stir, Mrs. Gray," he said quietly. "Every major outlet's here. Even the Times flew someone in." "I didn't cause it," I said, eyes fixed on the shrouded frame. "The truth did. It just needed a voice." He chuckled softly. "Well, it found the right one." Across the hall, I caught sight of Daniel. He looked pale, his suit slightly rumpled, but his eyes, his father's eyes, finally held something steady. Beside him reluctantly was Laura, every inch of her polished yet brittle. I could tell she hadn't wanted to come, but the cameras had dragged her here. Public image was her last religion. As the crowd hushed, Grant stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today we unveil not just a masterpiece, but a testament to endurance, to memory, and to the way art outlives those who try to bury it." He gestured toward me. "Please welcome Mrs. Helen Gray, widow of the late Edward Graymore, custodian of the Widow's Sea." Applause rose like a tide. I walked slowly to the microphone, every step echoing through the marble hall. When I reached the podium, the silence felt reverent. I rested my hand on the edge, feeling the tremor in my bones, quiet as I began to speak. "My husband painted this work in our last winter together," I said. "He called it The Widow's Sea long before I ever became one. He said it was about two things, what we hold on to and what we lose when we stop seeing what's in front of us." For years, this painting hung in my home, dismissed as clutter, mocked as worthless. but it was never the art that was forgotten. It was the love behind it. I let that hang in the air, then continued. This piece survived neglect, greed, even betrayal. But it also survived me because for too long I was too afraid to defend what mattered. Not anymore. A murmur rippled through the room. Cameras clicked faster. Grant returned to the stage, smiling. And now the moment we've all been waiting for. The assistant stepped forward, gripped the corners of the silk cloth, and lifted it. The reveal was instant silence, followed by a collective gasp. The widow's sea shimmered under the gallery lights, alive with impossible depth. The ocean swirled in tones of deep indigo and liquid gold, a horizon carved in strokes so fine they looked like memory itself. In the center, faint but deliberate, was a figure of a woman standing at the edge of the sea, her hair tangled with wind and light. She wasn't young, she wasn't fragile. She was simply there, unbroken. And beneath the waves hidden within the brushstrokes, Edward's real signature glowed faintly for H. I heard someone whisper, "It's breathtaking!" Then came the applause. Loud, thunderous, almost physical. But through the noise, I saw Laura's face, pale and trembling. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. When the reporters swarmed, microphones flashing, one shouted, "Mrs. Gray, what does it feel like to have your husband's legacy restored?" I smiled faintly. It feels like remembering who I am. Another asked, "What would you say to the people who didn't believe in you?" I met Laura's gaze across the room and said clearly, "Thank you." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. I continued, "Because disbelief is what sharpens faith. Without them, I might never have fought this hard." Grant leaned toward the microphone again. "Before we conclude, the museum has one final statement." He turned to me with a small knowing smile. "In honor of Mrs. Gray's integrity and her husband's genius, the museum will be establishing the Edward and Helen Graymore Foundation, a program supporting artists who've been forgotten, dismissed, or silenced." Applause surged again, but this time I didn't hear it. I was watching Daniel. He was crying quietly, unashamedly. When the crowd began to disperse for interviews, Laura approached me. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble, echoing like accusations. "You think this is over?" she hissed under her breath. "You humiliated me." "No," I said softly. "You did that yourself." She glared at me, her voice cracking. "You stole everything, Daniel, the house, our reputation." "I took nothing," I interrupted. "I simply stopped letting you steal." Her hands shook, but she still tried to hold her composure. "You'll regret making an enemy out of me." I looked at her with something closer to pity than anger. "Laura, you were never my enemy. You were my lesson." She flinched as if struck. For a second, the facade cracked completely. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking faster now, like retreat. Grant came over, lowering his voice. "She won't get far. The court papers you signed this morning make everything airtight. The painting, the funds, the trust, they're beyond her reach." I nodded slowly. "Good. Let her find out what a life without ownership feels like." As I turned back toward the painting, something inside me shifted. The applause, the lights, the validation, they all faded into a quiet hum. All that remained was the image of that woman in the waves, her eyes on the horizon. Edward had painted her years ago, but today I finally understood she was never drowning. She was choosing to walk into the sea because she knew she could survive it. The press conference continued in a blur, questions, handshakes, flashes, noise. But when it finally ended, Grant asked if I wanted a private moment with the painting before it was moved to the permanent exhibit. I nodded. The gallery emptied. The lights dimmed. For the first time, it was just me and the widow's sea. I stepped closer, tracing the faint outlines of Edward's brushwork. "You did it, love," I whispered. "You outlived them all." And then softly, almost like the sea itself was speaking, I heard a voice behind me. "So did you." I turned. Daniel stood a few feet away, eyes red but steady. "Dad would be proud," he said. I smiled, tears warming the corners of my eyes. "I think he already is." He hesitated. "I don't deserve to stand here, Mom." "Yes, you do," I said, "because you finally stood for something." We stood there in silence for a long while, both staring at the woman in the waves. Finally, he asked, "What will you do now?" I thought for a moment, live quietly, maybe by the sea this time, but not alone. He nodded. "Ava and Micah ask about you every day. They miss Grandma." I felt something in my chest ease open. "Then bring them to visit." Let them see where love ends up when you don't sell it." He smiled, a real one, the kind that carried the echo of the boy he used to be. As he turned to leave, I called after him, "Daniel." He looked back. "Tell them I said their grandmother never gave up on their father." His eyes glistened and he nodded. "I will." When he was gone, I stood alone once more. The museum lights dimmed further and the ocean in the painting seemed to breathe. For a brief, impossible moment, it felt like Edward was standing beside me, the scent of linseed oil and rain in the air. "Was it worth it?" I whispered. And somewhere between the strokes of blue and gold, between love and loss, the answer came not in words but in calm, the kind that only comes when the storm has done its work. Outside, as I stepped into the crisp evening air, the city glittered. Cameras still waited by the steps, reporters shouting questions, flashes bursting. But I didn't stop. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't owe the world a single explanation. I walked down the marble steps, the cool wind threading through my silver hair. Behind me, through the glass facade, the widow's sea hung illuminated under a single spotlight, a woman in the waves standing tall against the storm. And in that stillness, I felt Edward, again his voice, calm and certain. "You see, Helen, the sea never took anything from us, it just taught us how to stay." The cameras kept flashing, but none of them caught what really mattered. I wasn't leaving the museum as a widow or a victim or a story. I was leaving as proof. Proof that truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to last long enough to be seen. By morning, the world had already chosen sides. The news spread faster than I could breathe. My name, Edward's name, the widow's sea. They were everywhere. Headlines screamed in every language forgotten. Widow unveils $120. Million masterpiece. Family betrayal ends in triumph. Helen Gray's story breaks the internet. I didn't need to read them all. The sound was enough, the distant hum of something shifting, of people waking up to what dignity looks like when it refuses to die. By noon, a crowd had gathered outside the Boston Museum. Some held roses, others held handwritten signs that said, "Respect has no age, and we believe you, Helen." I watched from the balcony of the small apartment Grant had arranged for me near the harbor, the wind whipping my hair as if to remind me I was alive. Inside, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, foundations, art dealers, publishers, all hungry for their piece of my story. I ignored them. For the first time in years, I could choose silence. Instead, I turned on the television. The morning talk shows were replaying clips from the exhibition. There I was, standing beside the painting, my voice steady as I said, "It feels like remembering who I am." The host debated what they called the moral architecture of my story. One said, "It's about ageism." Another countered, "It's about greed." But the youngest one, the one with eyes still soft enough to feel, said quietly, "It's about not letting people write you out of your own life." That one made me smile. But what I didn't expect was how far the fire would spread. Within 24 hours, the museum's live stream had reached over 10 million views. People began sharing their own stories, teachers whose children mocked them, grandmothers written off as burdens, widowers who'd lost everything and still found grace. One message stopped me cold. It came from an art student in Nigeria. "Mrs. Gray, your story saved my mother. She wanted to stop painting because my uncles said she was too old. I showed her your video. Now she's painting again." I read it twice, then pressed the paper to my chest. The tears came quietly this time, not from pain, but from the strange weight of being seen. That afternoon, Grant called his voice bright with disbelief. "Helen, the foundation's already received hundreds of donations from collectors, from women's groups, even anonymous patrons. Your story's become a movement." I laughed softly. "I didn't mean to start one." "Maybe that's why it worked," he said. "The best revolutions start with someone just trying to tell the truth." Meanwhile, back in Savannah, the fire was burning in a different way. Walter called that evening, his voice crackling over the line. "You won't believe what's happening here, Helen. The town's buzzing, reporters everywhere. They're calling your old place the house that held a secret." I chuckled. "They always loved a headline." He hesitated. "Laura hasn't shown her face in days. Word is the gallery that bought your husband's sketches pulled the sale after your interview. They're returning them to you, said they want no part in stolen history." For a moment I couldn't speak. Returning them. All of them, he said it's the least they can do. The papers called it poetic justice. It was more than poetic. It was proof that when truth catches fire, it burns away everything false. But the real surprise came 2 days later. A letter arrived, this one trembling, uncertain, written in Daniel's handwriting. Mom, the kids saw the exhibition online. Ava cried. She said, Grandma looks like the woman in the painting. I didn't know what to say. Maybe she's right. Laura left. She packed her things and moved to her sister's. I won't pretend I'm sad. I just feel empty. I've spent so long being quiet that I forgot what honesty sounds like. I want to bring the children to see you. They deserve to know what strength looks like. If you'll have us, love, Daniel. I folded the letter and placed it on the windowsill where the late afternoon light could rest on it. Of course I'll have you, I whispered. Always. That evening, as the sun sank over the harbor, I went for a walk. People recognize me now, strangers stopping to thank me, some even hugging me as if I'd done something sacred. An elderly woman pressed my hands between hers and said, You reminded me that I still matter. A young journalist asked, What's next for you, Mrs. Gray? I smiled at him. Peace. Maybe a little mischief. But even peace has echoes. The next morning, a national magazine ran a feature titled The Widow Who Taught the World About Worth. The piece ended with a single line that made my breath catch. In the reflection of the sea she reclaimed, Helen Gray reminded us all that love, when protected long enough, turns into legacy. The museum scheduled a second exhibition this time, not just for Edward's work, but for artists over 60 whose voices had been ignored. They called it The Age of Light. The board insisted on opening it with my speech, but I told Grant I didn't want to talk. Let the art speak, I said. It's louder than words ever will be. Still, I attended the opening quietly, standing at the back. There were no cameras this time. No flashing lights, just people. Faces moved. Tears fell, laughter rippled softly through the crowd. And when someone asked where the idea came from, Grant pointed across the room toward me and said, From a woman who remembered what the world forgot. In Savannah, Walter told me later, people had begun leaving small seashells on the gate of my old house. Like an altar, he said, for what was lost and what was found. Even the local school art class wrote letters. One line stayed with me. We painted waves in class and called them Helen's Sea. I think that was the moment I realized the story was no longer mine. It belonged to anyone who had ever been dismissed, belittled or erased, and decided to exist anyway. But justice has its quieter forms, too. A week later, Melissa called to tell me that Laura's lawsuit had been withdrawn. Her attorney advised her to settle privately. She signed an affidavit admitting falsified statements to the media. You're clear. I exhaled slowly, almost smiling. No, Melissa. She's the one who's clear now. She finally told the truth. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the harbor lights reflecting on the surface like scattered stars. I thought about everything the sea had given and taken from me. I thought of Edward, of Daniel, of those long, silent years when I'd mistaken endurance for weakness. It struck me then that maybe endurance wasn't silence at all. It was preparation, the kind the tide makes before it comes crashing back stronger than ever. The phone buzzed. It was Daniel again, video calling from Savannah. When I answered, Ava's face filled the screen, her blonde curls wild with excitement. Grandma, we saw your painting. Daddy says you're famous. I laughed. No, sweetheart, I'm just old enough to stop being afraid. Will you teach me to paint like Grandpa, she asked. I'll teach you to see like he did, I said. That's harder. Behind her, Daniel smiled, and for a fleeting moment I saw Edward's ghost in that smile, content, quiet, watching from wherever the waves go when they rest. After the call, I walked down to the shore. The night was soft, the tide low. I crouched and let my fingers trace the edge of the water. The sea was calm again, but its rhythm carried something new, an echo of applause, of forgiveness, of endings that weren't really endings at all. As I stood, I saw Walter walking toward me, a small paper bag in his hand. Brought you something, he said. Inside were a few seashells, fragile, luminous, each one marked with a word written in ink truth. Memory, dignity. I smiled. You've been listening. He nodded. The whole world has? I turned back toward the water, holding one shell to my ear. The waves whispered faintly, and for a heartbeat it felt like Edward was laughing somewhere in the distance. I looked at Walter, the stars reflecting in his glasses. "Funny, isn't it?" I said. "All that noise we made trying to be heard. And in the end, it's the quiet that carries the furthest." He smiled. "That's because truth travels like the tide. It always finds its way home." And standing there with the ocean humming against the shore and the wind curling around us, I realized something simple, something final. They had tried to erase me, but in doing so, they'd written me into everyone else's story. The sea had kept its promise. The firestorm eventually burned itself out. Fame is like a match. It flares bright, then fades to smoke. By autumn, the headlines had moved on, chasing new scandals, new prodigies. And yet beneath all that noise, the truth I had fought for remained like bedrock, quiet, solid, undeniable. Laura's name still surfaced now, and then, usually buried in footnotes. The newspapers called it a cautionary tale of greed and image. She sold the house in Savannah within weeks of the court ruling, but no buyer wanted to live in what locals called the widow's house. Her new life was smaller, an apartment in Atlanta, a job at a boutique gallery where she smiled for strangers and avoided mirrors. I didn't hate her. Hate is a chain, and I had already learned how to live without one. Daniel came up to visit every other weekend. The first time he arrived, he stood awkwardly on my porch holding a jar of homemade jam and the same nervous expression he used to have as a boy caught sneaking cookies. "I made this," he said. I smiled. "You used to burn water, Daniel." "I followed a recipe," he admitted. "Penelope from next door helped." We laughed. It felt strange at first, laughter in a house that had known so much silence, but each visit made it easier. He fixed things, my leaky faucet, the squeaky hinge on the garden gate, and I cooked for him like I used to. Ava and Micah would chase gulls down by the water, while he told me about his job, his therapy sessions, his plans to start volunteering with local art programs. He was rebuilding quietly one day at a time. So was I. The museum kept the Widow's Sea under controlled lighting in the East Wing. Sometimes, when the gallery closed, I'd visit alone. The guards all knew me by name. I'd stand before the painting and watch the way the gold leaf shimmered in the dark as if it breathed. Visitors often said the woman in the waves looked peaceful. But when I saw her, I didn't see peace. I saw defiance, disguised as grace. One afternoon, a young woman approached me at the museum cafe. She must have been in her 20s, art student written all over her ink on her fingers, sketchbook tucked under her arm. "Excuse me," she said shyly. "Are you Mrs. Gray?" I nodded and she smiled nervously. "I just wanted to thank you. My mom left an abusive marriage last year. She said if you could survive what you did, so could she. We painted a copy of your husband's work together. We called it The Daughter's Sea." I felt something warm rise in my throat. "Then keep painting," I told her, "even when nobody's watching, especially then." She left, but her words stayed. I realized the story had traveled farther than I'd ever intended, to classrooms, community centers, even nursing homes. They said old women would sit together, painting waves, whispering, "We're not invisible anymore." That, I thought, was the real masterpiece. Walter, bless him, had become something of a local celebrity himself. The footage from his porch camera had been featured in documentaries, and reporters still called him for interviews, but he never bragged. I didn't do much, he'd say, just pointed my camera at the truth. Sometimes he'd come by for tea, sitting on my porch while the sea wind tangled what was left of his hair. "Funny thing, Helen," he said once, "justice doesn't roar, it lingers, like salt in the air." He was right. Even now, justice hadn't left it, just stopped needing to shout. The Graymore Foundation was thriving beyond anything I'd imagined. In its first 6 months, it funded 42 senior artists across 5 countries. The museum's new program, The Age of Light, had become an annual exhibit. Each year, I'd attend quietly, never as a guest of honor, just a witness. That was enough. But the real turning point came one quiet evening in November. The air smelled of rain, and I was cooking clam chowder when the phone rang. It was Melissa. "Congratulations, Helen," she said, her voice bright. "The federal court just ruled in your favor on the counterclaim. You're officially cleared of all allegations. And as for Laura's affidavit, it's public record now. The world knows who lied." I stirred the soup, listening to it bubble softly. "And what happens to her?" She'll pay fines, Melissa said. Maybe community service. Nothing more. That's enough, I said. Sometimes consequences don't need to destroy. They just need to remind. After the call, I took 2 bowls of chowder to the porch. One for me, one for the empty chair beside me. I raised my spoon to the sea and whispered, to truth quiet, slow and relentless. The wind answered with a low hum, carrying the scent of salt and memory. Later that month, Daniel brought Ava and Micah to visit. The children tumbled out of the car, laughing their hair, catching the late autumn light. Ava ran straight to me, clutching a notebook. "Grandma, look, I drew you." I looked at the sketch, a small, shaky figure standing on a beach facing the waves. The title written in her uneven handwriting read, "Grandma's Sea." My throat tightened. "It's perfect," I said. "You even got the wind right." Micah piped up, "Daddy said you're famous, are you?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart, I'm just free." That night, after they'd fallen asleep in the guest room, Daniel and I sat on the porch. The sky was heavy with stars, the sea whispering below. "You know, he said I used to think you stayed quiet because you were weak, but you were just waiting for the right time to speak." I smiled faintly. "That's what women do, Daniel. We survive long enough to make the truth impossible to ignore." He nodded, his voice thick. "I don't deserve how kind you've been." I reached over and touched his hand. "Kindness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. You've chosen better this time." He looked out at the water, silent for a while. Then he said Ava told me she wants to be an artist, like Grandpa. "I think she already is. She just needs someone to believe in her," I said. "That's all artists ever need." Before he left the next morning, he hugged me tighter than he had in years. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he whispered. "I almost did," I said softly. "Then I remembered I'm my father's wife and your mother." He laughed through his tears, kissed my cheek, and drove away with the children waving from the back seat. The sound of their laughter trailed behind like music. The house felt quiet after they left, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that holds peace, not absence. I walked into my study and opened my old notebook, the same one that had once held my notes of sorrow. I flipped to the last page and began to write again. Aftermath. I wrote about forgiveness, not the soft kind that erases, but the strong kind that remembers without bitterness. I wrote about Edward, about the way his colors still lived in every sunrise. I wrote about Daniel finally standing on his own feet, about Laura and the hollow victory of people who measure worth in possession instead of peace. And at the bottom of the page, I wrote the sentence that had taken me a lifetime to understand. Justice isn't revenge, it's recognition. When I finished, I set the notebook on the windowsill. Outside, the tide was high, the sea restless but beautiful. I could almost see the reflection of the widow's sea in the waves, a woman still standing still, watching, still alive. As I turned off the lamp, I thought of the thousands of people who'd watched my story unfold, the comments, the letters, the strangers, who whispered my name like a promise. I hope they remembered not the scandal, not the money, but the truth beneath it, that no one, no matter their age or silence, should ever be erased. The next morning, when I woke, the air was bright and cold. On the kitchen table lay a single seashell with a note beside it, in Walter's shaky handwriting. "The tide brought this in last night. Thought you might want to keep it. The world has a way of returning things to those who wait." I held the shell to my ear. Inside, the sea hummed softly, endless forgiving. And I smiled, because at last I understood what Edward had painted all along. The sea wasn't just his goodbye, it was our beginning. It's strange how peace doesn't arrive with trumpets or applause. It just drifts in one morning, quiet, as sunlight through lace curtains, and settles on your shoulders like something you'd been carrying all along. Winter came to Seabrook Bay, slow and pale, the kind of winter that doesn't bite but hushes everything. The garden lay sleeping under frost, the roses pruned down to patient stems. Inside my small house, the smell of cinnamon tea filled the air. I sat by the window as the tide rolled in, notebook, open, pen ready. For the first time in a long time, the page didn't frighten me. I began to write a letter, not to Daniel, not to Laura, not even to the museum, to myself, to the woman who had once stood in the attic of her own home, holding a broken painting and wondering if silence would ever mean safety. Dear Helen, I wrote you were wrong about weakness. You thought endurance was the absence of strength. but it was your strength disguised as stillness. Every time they called you fragile, you were just learning how to listen to the sound of your own pulse. I paused listening to the gulls outside, their cries sharp and clean. Then I wrote on. You carried grief like an heirloom. You let people take your space, your words, your name, and still you stood. That's not submission, it's faith. And faith, when tested long enough, becomes fact. You were never waiting for rescue. You were waiting for the right moment to remember yourself. When I finished, I folded the page and slipped it into the back of the notebook. It wasn't meant to be read. Some letters are just mirrors written in ink. That afternoon, Daniel arrived with the children. Ava burst through the door, first a gust of laughter behind her. "Grandma, we brought something," she shouted. Micah followed, struggling to carry a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. Daniel smiled. "They've been working on it for weeks." Ava placed the painting in my hands, eyes sparkling. "Open it." I peeled back the paper and my breath caught. It was a painting of a sea, but not blue like Edward's. This one was golden sunlight reflected on calm waves with a tiny figure standing on the shore. The brushstrokes were clumsy, uneven but full of joy. At the bottom, in a shaky scrawl, it said, "For Grandma, because you taught us that tides always come back." I felt the tears rise before I could stop them. "It's beautiful," I whispered. Micah grinned. "We called it the Children's Sea. Daddy said maybe one day it'll hang next to Grandpa's." Daniel chuckled softly. "I told them stories about you, Mom, about how you kept our family from sinking." I touched his arm. "No, Daniel, I didn't keep us from sinking. I just taught us how to float until the storm passed." We spent the rest of the day together baking cookies, talking, laughing in the kitchen until the air smelled of sugar and memory. At sunset, the children ran to the porch to chase the light. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching them with a small, wistful smile. "They remind me of me," he said, "before everything got complicated." "Children always remind us who we used to be," I said. "That's their quiet revenge." He looked at me for a long time. "You forgave me faster than I forgave myself." I smiled. "That's because I had practice. Forgiveness isn't forgetting Daniel. It's choosing to love with better boundaries." When they left that evening, the house was filled with a kind of echo, not emptiness, but residue. The good kind. The kind that hums quietly after laughter. I poured myself tea, carried it to the porch, and watched the last streaks of pink fade from the sky. The water below caught the colors like a mirror, rose gold, then deepening blue. I thought of Edward again. I always did at this hour, but tonight his memory didn't ache. It glowed. I could almost see him sitting in the chair across from me, the one Walter helped repaint. He'd probably be teasing me, saying I'd become more famous than him. Only because I had a better publicist. I murmured into the air and smiled at my own joke. A soft wind lifted off the sea, carrying the faint scent of salt and paint. I closed my eyes and let it pass over me like a blessing. For so long, I'd believed that justice would look like revenge, loud, sharp, undeniable. But in the end, it was gentler than that. Justice, I realized, isn't about balance. It's about restoration. It gives back what was stolen, not the thing itself, but the meaning of it. The sea outside whispered against the shore, patient as time. A week later, I visited the museum one last time before moving permanently to Seabrook. Grant met me at the entrance, smiling. "You're leaving us for good." I nodded. "I think I've done enough talking for one lifetime." He grinned. "Maybe, but your story's still teaching others. We just approved another round of grants for senior artists. One woman wrote that your courage made her finish the novel she started 30 years ago. "Then it was worth it," I said, "all of it." We walked together down the long hallway toward the Widow's Sea. Visitors stood silently before it, heads tilted upward, eyes glassy. One young man whispered to another, "She looks like she's waiting for someone." "No," I said softly behind them. "She's remembering someone." They turned startled, but I only smiled. Grant asked, "Does it feel strange seeing people read your life on a wall?" "Not strange," I said, "sacred." When I left the museum, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Edward's light was everywhere now, in the air, in the faces of strangers, in the quiet strength of people who'd heard my story and seen themselves in it. That night, I walked the shoreline near my house. The tide was low, the sand cool beneath my bare feet. A crescent moon hung above, pale and thin as a brushstroke. I carried a single rose with me, one of the last from my garden. When I reached the water's edge, I let it fall into the waves. It drifted away slowly, crimson petals glowing like embers against the silver tide. "Thank you," I whispered to Edward, to life, to the sea itself, for teaching me how to return to myself. The wind rose, scattering tiny ripples across the water as if answering. I turned back toward the house where the windows glowed warm in the dark. On the porch table sat my old notebook pages fluttering in the breeze. I picked it up and added one final entry. Resolution. The world will try to measure you by the noise you make, but real strength lives in the quiet between storms. It's in the act of staying, of believing when belief looks foolish, of standing back up even when no one claps. That's what dignity is, a tide that never truly leaves. If you ever forget who you are, listen for the waves. They will remind you. I closed the notebook and placed it beside Edward's photograph, his eyes still warm beneath the glass. "We're home now," I told him. Outside, the night deepened into stillness. The sea kept breathing, constant and vast, carrying our story out into the world, one more current among millions, but ours all the same. And maybe somewhere out there another woman would hear it, a mother, a widow, a daughter, and she'd whisper to herself, "If Helen could stand, so can I." I hope she does, because that's how tides work. They always return. They always bring something back. And sometimes what they bring isn't what was lost, it's who we've become because of it. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. I leaned back in my chair, the night soft around me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next blow, the next betrayal, the next wave. I was just waiting for the morning, and I knew it would come.